What's the scariest encounter with another human you have ever experienced? Story 1. I got chased down by the neighborhood delinquent teen with a gun when I was walking home from the bus stop with friends. I was 10 years old. My friends were 10 and 11 years old too. We ran to a house for help. A middle-aged woman answered and refused to let us in or help us. She said it could be a prank. We told her it was not, but she was convinced we were trying to get in her house and rob her. We ran farther to my friend's house. Her mom happened to be off work early and was home. She called the police. I got to ride in a police car and watch 2 police officers take down this 17-year-old person into the pavement. Story 2. I was investigating a fire for an insurance company in a fourplex in North St. Louis. North St. Louis is a bad area. It was clearly an arson. I had 5 separate unconnected fires. I had been there for a while, taking photos and doing my thing. I was drawing my diagram in the building when I heard 2 guys walking by the building on the other side of the wall. I was straining to hear what they were saying since it could be pertinent to my investigation. The 2 guys got to the rear of the building where the fire department had ripped out the wall to be able to extinguish hot spots they had found. I could clearly see them both standing there talking. They started to kick through the debris on the ground, and one started saying how some person had reported his buddy for setting this fire. He started telling the other guy about how he was going to deal with her and pulled a pistol out of his waistband. At this point, I was frozen in fear, hoping that they would not look 90 degrees and see me standing there. So I crouched down as low as I could without making noise and waited. They continued to talk about how it was wrong. She told the police on him. Finally, a car drove by and I used the sound of it to get out of the house out the front door, which unfortunately was not super quiet since most of the floor had collapsed and I was wearing fire boots. I got to my truck across the street. I was sitting in the driver's seat trying to calm down when the guy with the gun walked around the side of the house to the front porch, sat down and aimed it at me. I turned the truck on and got out of there. I ended up going back about an hour later to see if they were gone because I had to finish my scene. Still top 5 scariest moment of my career so far. Story 3. I was at a sleepover at my friend's place. We decided to sneak out and wander around aimlessly. We stopped at our school, which had a small patch of trees on the grounds where the older kids hung out during lunch. There were rumors of a great magazine collection there, hence our visit. While there, my friend stepped off to the side to have a pee. A few seconds later, he came rushing back and said, "Run." I did not know what his deal was, but as a kid in the forest with only the light of the moon, I figured asking questions was a secondary option to being left alone there. We ran until we could not run anymore. Finally, my friend explained that there was someone looking at him while he was going pee. He said that he believed the guy was behaving inappropriately. Being kids with a history of pranks, I thought he was messing with me. Then I looked back and saw the guy a long way back, but moving in our direction. We kept running towards my friend's place, and he kept following. When we got back, we thought we lost him. We snuck back inside and turned off all of the lights in the basement. We laid there silently and terrified. About 10 minutes later, we saw something move by the window. We knew someone was out there. We stayed completely still and quiet. A minute later, we heard a noise coming from a room in the basement. We both panicked and started yelling for my friend's dad. He came running down the stairs and we were yelling that someone was in that room. His dad flung open the door and the window was open, and there were fresh marks on the wall from someone climbing in or out. For some reason, he did not call the police. He decided to stay downstairs with us for the night. I did not really sleep, and in the morning, my friend's dad made me walk home with him. A few blocks away, there were a bunch of police. As we walked by, one of the officers stopped us and asked if we saw anything suspicious last night. We told him the story, which kicked off further questioning. It turned out that a kid went missing from his room right around the same time that we got chased home. They found the guy a few days later dead from suicide. They never found the boy he abducted. We had a lot of trouble with that. My friend's dad felt guilty for not calling the police. He became addicted to sleeping pills. My friend was traumatized with just how close he came to being grabbed in the forest. He turned to substances really young and eventually died by suicide. I went through therapy for a while and still have occasional night terrors from that night, even though it happened almost 30 years ago. Story 4. Last year, I moved from a dense urban area to a really pretty, underpopulated rural one. I got super into trail running. There is a big circular route that I like a lot in the local nature preserve, And over the summer, I was on an early morning run there when I passed a man sitting on a rock slightly off the trail. He looked exceedingly normal, wearing street clothes, a hat, boots, and so on, and I figured him for a hiker. All good. So I made my way down the path, around, uphill, and to this nice overlook where I usually stop to drink from the fountain. It was when I was bent over at the fountain that I heard a twig snap, and I straightened up to see that man, crouched over and stepping through the woods off the clearing like he was trying to creep up on me. I bolted. The sprint back was the most terrifying experience of my life, obviously. I do not know if I lost him or if he gave chase at all. The police never found anyone matching his description, and I do not run anywhere near there anymore. Story 5. Once, whilst getting stoned with mates in a graveyard at about 16 to 17, my friend's little brother was suddenly accosted by an absolute giant of a man and a pair of his companions. We had seen them coming, but did not expect any violence. He grabbed my mate's brother in a headlock and said that they were going to go shave his head. I will add that we were all the typical long-haired, black denim and band t-shirt wearing types, and getting verbally and occasionally physically abused was kind of standard. Thinking that they were probably joking to a degree, I pulled my friend out of the hold. Well, next thing I knew, I was being punched around the face by a guy a solid foot taller than me, a decade older, and with strength and a reach that I could not possibly compete with. I spent a lot of my childhood getting beaten by adults, but by this point I thought I had got through that part of my life. He held me by my neck and just kept punching me until I hit the ground. By this point, my collective of mates were doing all they could to stop him, but he was swatting them like flies, and one called the police. Once I was on the ground, he kicked me in the skull, 11 times in all. I had heard he was wearing steel-toed boots, but I am not entirely sure if that is true. But he just would not stop throwing all he had at my skull. The last kick was under the chin, and everyone heard a massive crunch. It was enough to make my attacker stop and run away. It was okay, though. It was not my neck. But I had just had 7 of my teeth shattered whilst biting through the edges of my tongue. I was left with a damaged eye, ear, memory, and spine. I still get weird headaches since then too, but I got off lucky. Because I do not bruise, the hospital kind of dismissed me upon arrival, and I then had to go give a statement, and it was over time that a lot of the more frustrating issues became apparent. They caught the man. He had to pay me £120 towards dental bills. But most importantly, my friends were all fine. I had been getting my ass kicked by people for years, so I was happy it was me and not them. I just had no idea why he was so determined to seemingly hurt me severely. He died a couple of years back now. Good riddance. Story 6. I was up in my 3rd floor bedroom having just had a spliff chilling to music with my headphones on when I started to hear weird noises. Naturally, I just thought it was because I was stoned, but it was weird enough for me to take my headphones off. I listened for a bit, and coming from downstairs was a creepy voice I did not recognize, mixed in with John's, my housemate's, voice, but he sounded like he was in pain. I was like, what is going on? So I started walking slowly down my stairs and then looked into his room and saw John on his floor holding his eyes in pain, with a big man in a hoodie shouting at him and then grabbing things off the shelves. The next thing I knew, autopilot had kicked in, and I ran towards the room, and the hooded man turned and ran out the door when I smashed into him, making us both go tumbling down the staircase trying to exchange punches on the way down. We scuffled a bit in the hallway until he eventually ran out the door. It transpired that John, who at that time was on crutches, was hobbling home and went to open our front door when the hooded man came up behind him and sprayed him in his face, blinding him. He then took him up to his bedroom to rob him and his stuff. Poor guy had to have iPads on for the next 2 days. Anyway, it was all pretty messed up, but John was okay in the end. And honestly, I was so stoned, it did not really feel like it was happening at the time. It was like a bad trip. We all moved out 2 weeks later. It was Brixton in London. Story 7. I had just spent a fantastic Saturday evening at a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. Beer led to more beer, and then somehow single malt whiskey pushed its way into the party. I left his house at about 12:30 in the morning and caught a tram home. The tram was crowded enough that I needed to stand near the door. Sometime around halfway home, the tram stopped at a station, and I looked up from the book I was reading to see some enraged guy charging across the tracks, yelling as he came towards me. Because my blood was somewhere around 20% scotch, it took me a while to realize that he was running across the tracks towards me specifically. I heard him yell. I saw his saliva splatter on the tram door. He punched the tram door twice, really hard. Thankfully, the tram doors do not open on the other side while it is stopped at the station. As the tram began to depart, he still held on for a few seconds, while some of the other folks on the tram, safe in the knowledge he could not get in, started to tease him. Incidentally, they called him a prawn, which was not an insult I had heard before. I have no idea who he was, or what provocation he perceived, or what he would have tried if he had opened the doors. Naturally, once the tram left him behind, I tried to just kind of stand there, looking unperturbed. It was only the next morning that I thought how much worse that situation may have ended up if either the tram door had opened or I had been walking past this guy instead of being on public transport. Story 8. My cousin, who was about 14, was babysitting us. 9-year-old me and my 4-year-old brother, when her dad called coming down from what I want to say was crack or hero, I do not know. Something really bad. He called and screamed at her to tell him where her piggy bank was. She told him to go away and hung up. He called back. She did not pick up. And he left a voice message which played as he was leaving it, saying basically that he was going to come down there and hurt all of us with a knife, that he was going to come down there and kill us all. He was full of nonsense, but we were terrified. Can you imagine the pure fear a 9-year-old feels when a grown man who sounds unhinged says he is going to murder her with a knife? So we prepared. We blocked out the windows, locked everything, put heavy furniture in front of the doors. My brother was asleep in his room. My cousin told me to just leave him, but I could not stand the thought of him being alone in there, so I covert-style belly crawled. Heart beating out of my chest, across the kitchen, through the living room to his room, scooped him up, and brought him back to my mom's room, which we then barricaded ourselves into. I got no sleep that night, and my mom and my aunt came back the next morning asking what we had done. But I was honestly just happy to be alive, and that my mom was home again. The worst part of the whole thing is that when she got home, her dad had sold all of her belongings. I mean everything. Her bed, her dresser, her television. It was all gone. It was just an empty room. He is clean now, but I still hate his guts. Forget you, Uncle Donald. Story 9. Back in the early 1990s, I worked as a night auditor for a small motel in Prospect Heights, Illinois. I was a young mother and worked nights while my husband worked days. Occasionally, my husband would stop by and check on me. It was a brutal schedule, and I truly do not know how I made it on only a couple of hours of sleep each day. But I digress. My job was to perform a daily audit on the rooms and money. Also, I would check people in and out of the hotel. The hours were midnight to 8 in the morning. One night I had finished my audit and was watching a scary movie on the little television they had behind the front desk. It was winter and very cold. A man came up to the door and he was wearing a ski mask. For a second I thought it was my husband, so I kind of smiled. He came up to the front desk and I asked if I could help him. He asked me why I had smiled at him. Well, I knew right then I was in trouble. He waved a big knife at me and told me to turn around. I felt the most fear then. I felt like I was going to die. He hopped over the front desk and cut one of the phone lines and took the money. I had my coat and purse back there, and he took those as well. As he left, he said, "I have your purse. I know where you live now." I stayed hunched in the corner behind the front desk as he left. Then I realized he had only cut the handset to one phone and the main line on another. So I took the handset from one phone and attached it to another where he had not cut the main line. I dialed 911 and got an operator on the line. Just as I was about to talk, the guy came back. Apparently he had dropped his knife behind the desk. I saw it on the floor as he came around. I picked it up. In my mind I was thinking, can I stab him? We stood there kind of facing each other, me in my uniform and this big guy in a thick ski jacket. He demanded I give him the knife. I truly thought if I tried to stab him I would lose, and he would kill me. I gave him the knife. He took the knife and hit me over the head with the handle of the knife a couple of times and then left. The police soon came and I recounted my story. As far as I know, he was never caught. The place I worked for let me have a day off, but when I needed more, since I had head injuries, they fired me. It turns out they had been robbed a few times before, but had never put in security. I did take them to court for lost wages, and I won. About a year later, maybe less, I saw on the news that a night auditor or clerk at the same hotel had been kidnapped from the motel, assaulted, stabbed, and left for dead. They caught that guy and he is now in prison. I am literally shaking as I type this. It has been so long, but I rarely talk about this, or I just laugh it off like it was no big thing. Obviously, it still affects me greatly. It was the scariest night of my life. The hotel, when I worked there, was an Econo Lodge, but they apparently changed the name soon after I left to Forest Lodge. So when the story about the kidnapped clerk came on the news, I did not immediately realize it was the same motel, until they showed a photo of the motel. Then I knew, and it scared me deeply. Story 10. My father was a terrible sperm donor, and the short time he was barely in my life, he messed me up. I remember my mother telling me to run when he came home angry or drunk, to lock my bedroom door and turn on the television. I could hear him screaming, breaking things, beating up my mother, banging on my door, trying to bust in. Police coming, my mother crying, him being back that same night or the next morning, and then repeat. Sometimes she could not stop him, and I would be involved, and he would use me as a punching bag, and I would be thrown around like a rag doll. He would rip my mother's clothes off and force himself on her in front of me. He would always be let go because he had friends who were police officers. One night I woke up and heard my mother crying and went to our front door that led to the apartment stairs and opened the door to look down. I remember I said something, but do not know what, and saw my mother bleeding and her shirt ripped off. He came up the stairs and I looked up and remember him punching me hard, not sure if he punched more than once. But I remember my head hitting the coffee table and nothing else. I do not remember what happened days after or anything, but I remember the judge giving my father weekend custody of me, and me crying whenever I was forced to be with him. He would act like a different person in public and sometimes at home, and out of nowhere, he would be someone else. He eventually stopped picking me up and never saw me again. I was around 5, but he left his mark. I remember him using substances with me in the car, drinking and driving with me, touching me and other kids, him pulling out a gun or knife at people, and so on. He was a very scary person to be around and left destruction for anyone of the female gender he stayed close to. Story 11. I was walking through campus after a night class around 9 or 9:30 at night. It is a big campus, the University of Central Florida, and pretty empty at this point. The shuttle I took was at the other end of campus, so it was a pretty long walk. At one point, I was walking through a swampy area with a raised boardwalk. There were 2 girls a ways ahead of me walking together, and I saw them reach the end of the boardwalk and go into the next building. As I reached the end of the boardwalk, this guy kind of hopped up out of nowhere or the surrounding woods. He took my hand and started telling me how beautiful I was, what my name was, what year I was at university, what I was doing tonight, where I lived. I asked him why he wanted to know, and he said he was taking a survey. I was literally in such shock that it took me a second to realize he was even touching me or had my hand. Everything he was asking me sounded really unauthentic and like it was scripted, like he was in a rush to get everything out. He also had this really weird, unsettling vibe that instantly freaked me out. But it was dark outside, and I was all alone at this point. Thankfully, a minute or 2 later, a guy walked out through the building, and I used that moment to break my hand away from the weirdo and tell him I had to go. I have never walked so fast to my shuttle, looking over my shoulder the whole time. I could not stop shaking the whole ride home. Something about that guy was off, and I was sure that if that man had not come out when he did something bad, would have happened to me. Exactly what, I do not want to think about. Keep in mind there had been a group of 2 girls walking ahead of me, and he had not approached them. He was looking for a girl by herself. Story 12. I was trying to take my girlfriend to the hospital since we thought she had appendicitis or something. It was about 12:30 in the morning on a Sunday in Fayetteville, North Carolina, which if you do not know is an absolute terrible place. We got 2 streets away from where we were living when we came across this street racing type car with neon lights on the rims and so on, pulled out halfway into the road. I stopped and waited a while for it to move, and it did not. So I pulled around it and kept going, The car accelerated and cut me off around the bend. It slowed down and would not let me pass. A second car pulled up on the right. A third car pulled up on the left. At this point, we were boxed in. A young man wearing a white tank top and khaki shorts got out of the car holding a pistol. Someone else in the car handed him a blue bandana. Then he started walking towards us. At this point, I was starting to realize that this was too many people for a robbery, and there was a reason for him being handed the bandana, and it was probably a gang initiation. So I threw the car in reverse and bumped a fourth car I had not been looking at because I was looking at the guy with the gun. I threw it forward and went to squeeze past the car on the left and the front car. When the guy started shooting, he fired 3 shots that thankfully did not hit either of us. It is important to mention that at this point we were on a sort of back road a bit away from a 4-way intersection with a stoplight, and across the street there was a shopping center with a 24-hour grocery store. I sped through the red light with the intention of going to the store and asking for help. Before I could make it across, we were hit on the passenger side by a completely unrelated vehicle that was going 55 miles per hour. The car spun out, ended up on the side of the road, and was totaled. The guys in the cars left once other people were involved. I ended up getting a traumatic brain injury and whiplash from the car accident and was paranoid for a very long time afterwards. My girlfriend ended up mostly okay, with some bruised ribs and whiplash as well. Story 13. When I was a third key at GameStop, I had a man come in as soon as the store opened. Typically, only one person is there to open the store, and another employee does not arrive until 1 or 2 in the afternoon. At the time, corporate was really encouraging us to use these new tablets to sell games from the website and show game trailers and videos. So this guy starts asking me about a game called Dragon's Crown, which is notorious for highly serialized visuals. He keeps insisting on watching these gameplay videos, and I am getting more and more uncomfortable. Finally, after about 10 minutes of this, he looks at me and says that he just loves breasts, that he loves them so much, and asks if I am married. I am. After I tell him this, he says that is too bad and that he would do disgusting things to me, that I am so attractive. He said everything in this low, quiet voice, almost like a whisper. At this point, I am just in full panic mode. I have the phone in my hand ready to dial 911. After a few more disturbing comments, he just left the store. I am not sure if he just wanted to scare women or what, but I was 100% sure he was going to attack and kill me that morning. It has been almost 4 years, and my skin still crawls when I think about his voice. Story 14. I was out with 2 girlfriends at a bar and met this woman a bit older than us. We were talking for a while, and when they announced last call, she said she and her friends were going to an after-hours club if we wanted to go. Friends talked it over. We went. Her friends were 2 younger Arabic men who did not drink. One of them drove. We all went to the club, had a great time dancing, decided it was time to go home, and the driver started driving us to our car, except he turned into a private parking garage. We started yelling at the driver. He was telling the garage attendant to close the door behind us. The attendant did what he was told, so we started yelling at the attendant to open the door. The big Jamaican attendant started yelling at the driver because he was getting the whole kidnapping vibe coming off this situation. The 2 guys started yelling in Arabic, got out of the car, and began beating up the attendant. I got out of the back seat and pulled that big door up about 3 feet and hustled out of there in heels. One of my friends followed me and we ran for 2 blocks and ducked into an alley. We were well hidden but could see the street. So we peeked out, and sure enough, there was the guy's black SUV creeping slowly. Then we noticed that it was our other friend driving. She had the sense to open the door the rest of the way and steal the guy's car. The older woman was in the back seat, freaking out. We had become the kidnappers. My friend drove the SUV across town to a few blocks from her car, and the 3 of us got out. The older lady took off. We walked to our car, feeling oddly invincible for 3 women who had almost been trafficked. We felt better when we were over the bridge, though. Story 15. When in 2012, I was just north of Irwin, Tennessee, while through hiking the Appalachian Trail in the Roan Mountain area. While at our campsite, maybe 25 yards off a dirt forest trail, a blue F-150 pulled up, and a man got out and said he was an undercover forest ranger. Right. He said there had been a lot of kids causing trouble up around those parts, and asked if we had any guns or substances. It was myself and another older gentleman from New Orleans who also said he was through hiking, and two off-duty Coast Guard who were making a weekend hiking trip together. Before that evening, none of us had ever met. We discussed and decided that the guy was fairly creepy and decided to split up and scout out maybe a replacement place to camp. We agreed to each hike 15 minutes north or south and come back and report if there was a more suitable spot where we would be away from the road and where the guy would have a harder time finding us. After our recon trip, we came back and decided there really was nothing all that suitable and decided to just push our tents a little deeper into the woods so as to not be spotted as easily. Around 9 at night, everyone was in bed and asleep, or nearly so, when 3 gunshots rang out and they were not off in the distance. In less than 5 minutes, a truck came screaming down the path with the high beams on, and the same guy from earlier got out, brandishing a Glock with an extended magazine. He was hysterical and told everyone to get out of their tents and on the ground. For the next nearly 45 minutes, he kept up the charade that he was an undercover game warden or fish and wildlife person. The story would change. After a few minutes into the ordeal, it was fairly obvious he was unstable or on something. That did not change the fact that he had a gun pointed at us. He would rinse and repeat the same lines over and over. Do you have guns, substances, or money? You do not have cash. How will you survive out here? I am just trying to keep you guys safe. There are 4 of you and 1 of me. You are going to try and jump me. Then he would swing the gun around and brandish it wildly. This whole cycle would usually last 6 to 8 minutes at a time, and nearly the entire 45 minutes we were either laying on our stomachs or on our knees. Fairly early on, the guy from New Orleans jumped up and ran into the woods, found out later with a cell phone, and called the police. They said it would take them about 45 minutes to make it out to the woods and to hold tight. Of course, I did not know any of this, and more importantly, the guy holding us up lost his mind. Undercover man shouted into the woods and said that if New Orleans did not come back, the rest of us would be sorry. The guy actually came back. Seriously, he did not know any of us. And even today, I genuinely do not believe that if I was in his shoes, I would walk back into that situation. It is the bravest thing I have ever seen someone do. The situation ended when the man demanded to search our backpacks for the aforementioned substances, guns, or money. He was kind of easing into stage 3 where he was just trying to keep us safe. He leaned down to search my backpack, and the 2 Coast Guard guys jumped up simultaneously and tackled him. I knocked the gun out of his hand and quickly dropped the mag and discovered that there was a live round in the chamber the whole time. We tied the guy up and waited for the police, who showed up about 20 minutes later. I was incredulous that their response was essentially that he was just crazy John, that he had really done it this time, or that John would have been within his rights to be shot dead. For the record, his name was not John, but it was very generic sounding. Here is the best part of the story. There were obviously empty bottles of liquor and a film canister with crushed something in it, and a cell phone with 14 missed calls from his apparent son. While this was being searched, it was explained to me that he was a former minister who got struck by lightning and became a pill popper, and odd ever since. He was known for messing with people, but never to that degree before. I ended up finishing my through hike, but that was without a doubt the scariest thing that happened while I was doing it. Story 16. This is a long one, but background is necessary to understand why I was so terrified. All through high school, there was this kid named Charles. Charles was a strange kid. He loved guns, loved talking about guns, military technology, and so on, and he loved boasting about his knowledge to anyone who would give him an ear. He also bragged about killing animals, not just in hunting, but in his backyard, killing birds and so on. And we lived in the suburbs, so it was definitely creepy. He also frequently made sarcastic or ironic statements about how great Nazis were, as well as general racist and anti-Semitic comments. To my misfortune, Charles had several classes with me and sat next to me very frequently. I was terrified of this kid and was genuinely concerned that he would attack the school. So in the hopes that he would spare us in such an event, I, as well as my friends, would be friendly and humor him whenever we could not avoid him. But our senior year, Charles started getting into the substance game, selling weed mainly, and he started working at a local hookah lounge that was a popular teen destination. Me and my friends did not know this, however, and one night we went to that same hookah lounge. Charles was there working, and he sat down with us, forcing himself into the conversation as he always did, starting to talk about the substances he sold and the guns he had on him and in his car. Then he started talking about a trap house he had nearby that he wanted to take us to, presumably to brag and boast about his hard lifestyle or whatever. I got up and left to the bathroom, hoping he would be gone when I came back. But my friend Evan, scared that Charles would have it out for him if he said no, agreed to go with him to the trap house. When I came back, they were leaving, and Evan looked at me with a help me expression, so I followed them out and went with. Me and Evan were convinced he was going to murder us or something. I literally had my hand on my seatbelt and the car door in case he decided to try anything while we were in the car. He took us to a shady apartment complex, and by this time we knew he was just going to rob us or kill us or both. We followed him into the house, still too scared to run in case he would hunt us down later or something, and it was a standard trap house. Substance dealers and girls were chilling and smoking on couches, guns and baggies were strewn about. Charles seemed incredibly juxtaposed against this crowd, but he walked in and showed us his guns and substances. Then that was it. We left and got back in his car and went back to the hookah lounge. But I truly thought that was going to be the end for us. It was definitely one of the most tense and scary moments of my life. After that, we avoided him completely. We only had one semester left anyway. I have not heard anything from him since graduation, and that was years ago. Story 17. There are plenty of specific examples, but in general it was when my father's abuse turned to me. I had seen it with my mother, brother, and stepmother, but I was too young to fully understand, and all I knew was that if I was quiet, I would be fine. Until the point where I was old enough to disagree with what my father said, for instance, that I was not allowed vaccines, I was not allowed to eat meat, I was not allowed to leave the house except to go to school. Then he started the same tactics he used with the others. He never actually hit us, but he would trap one person in a room and shout at them for ages. He would hit the wall by their head repeatedly to make them flinch. He would threaten to throw them out an upper floor window. He was often on substances, so he was unpredictable with it. One moment in particular comes to mind, though. I had to quit university because of mental health issues. He came to pick me up, and for the whole 3-hour motorway journey, he shouted at me for wasting his time, throwing my life away, not succeeding like he told me to, not appreciating everything he had done for me. He screamed at me to stop crying. He said it was my fault he did not have weed to make the day bearable because he had to spend money on fuel to pick me up. So it was my fault he was screaming at me and hitting the dashboard and acting like he was going to ram into other cars to teach me a lesson. We were on motorways and over bridges, but I was seriously considering jumping out of the car. But I knew he would get me back in the car, and then things would be worse. The only other person I have been scared of like that is my current partner. Not because he is a violent man or is abusive at all, but because of some medication he was given. He has PTSD from a really terrible life event, far worse than what I describe above, and the doctors tried giving him some new medication to help it. I looked into his eyes, and he was a totally different man. He had no fear, no care, no empathy. It was like looking at my unpredictable, abusive, substance-up father again. Logic did not get through to him. He did not have normal reactions, or even normal reaction times. The next day, he could not believe what he had done and said while he was on it. This thankfully has not happened since, and I fully trust him, but for that one night he scared me. I was bullied through school. I have stood up to people who have hassled me. I have walked through the wrong part of town, but the interactions which terrify me are when people are, for whatever reason, unpredictable and not fully with it. Story 18. This happened when I was about 9 or 10. It was around 8:30 on a Tuesday or Thursday. My parents and I were watching television when there was a knock at the door. My dad got up and answered it to see a man standing there with a white van behind him. He looked like he was in his early 30s. My dad went outside to talk to him as I hid behind the television stand and waited for him to leave. It was hard for me to hear what they were saying, but I could hear my dad say no thanks, and we are good. When my dad got back inside, I saw the van leave and asked him what had happened. The guy had asked if he could come inside to do a security system estimate, because he was a door-to-door salesman. My dad said he could see a bunch of other guys inside the van staring at them. When they left, my mom called the neighbor to ask her what was going on, and apparently they had asked almost everyone on our street the same question. My neighbor called the police and started to follow the van. The guys caught on, and when my neighbor turned around to go home, they started following her. She eventually lost them, but the whole ordeal was still scary nonetheless. Story 19. About 10 years ago, I was kind of seeing this girl I had known for quite a while before that. She called me at about 3 in the morning, and she was crying and told me that I needed to come get her because she was out partying and ended up at a random house and was scared of the guys there. She found out the address from her friend, and I got up and drove to the house to get her. I got out of my truck and started walking to the front door when she came running out of the house and told me to get back in my truck. Still tired and confused, I did not move. Not 5 seconds later, a man came strutting out the door with a shotgun pointed right at my face. I stood there in shock for a couple of seconds, and then his friend, who was also my friend, came running out telling the man with the gun that I was okay and that I was not a cop. The gun was lowered and I got into my truck and left. On the way home, the girl told me that the man with the shotgun thought she had called the cops and he was not having any of it. She said that he was definitely going to shoot me once he saw me pull up and that she ran out to warn me. So I nearly got shot in the face by a man out of his mind on substances. Story 20. I came across this weird guy when I was walking home from school one day. I was either 12 or 13. It was a good 20 to 30-minute walk home from school, and I was finally in my neighborhood on my street. I could see a couple of blocks ahead that there was this tall guy walking toward my direction. He was on the opposite side of the street. Then he crossed the street to my side. I stepped into the gutter, yielding him the sidewalk, and then he did the same. We were still a block away from each other. I stepped back onto the sidewalk, and then a few steps later, he did the same. In my mind, I was freaking out. This guy looked extremely sketchy. I had half a mind to just turn up the nearest driveway and pretend to fumble with house keys. But I froze. I stayed on the sidewalk until we were a few steps away, and I sidestepped into the gutter. He just passed me. No words, no motions. At that moment, I ran home as fast as I could. At one point, I turned to see if he had turned around and started following or whatever, and saw he had stopped and was staring at me. I made it inside, called one of my parents at work to tell them. I turned on the television, which happened to be on the local news channel, and there he was. Breaking news: escaped convict. I called the police and told them what I saw, and they caught him 30 minutes later, a few blocks away. I stopped walking and started riding a bike to school. Story 21. I have two, but I have never talked about this one because I did not realize until years later what a terrifying situation I was in. I was in 10th grade and was involved in a co-ed sport. We had a match that day and had decided as a team that we would carpool with other teammates instead of riding the bus. For context, first of all, this older guy on the team had asked me out. I had said no, and he had been acting kind of weird since then, like telling people I had said yes and that we were dating. Second, this trip was just going 45 minutes away. It was straight down the expressway. I rode with him, another guy and another girl, because no one else had space in their car, and I did not have my license yet or was not allowed to drive that far. I cannot remember. Regardless, I rode with him. Afterwards, we were supposed to be going straight back to the school to be picked up or drive home. Our coach had said, no detours, go straight back. My stepdad was waiting on me at the time we had said we would be there, and by the time we headed back, it was already dark. Out of the blue, this guy decided he would take the girl home since she was on the way. This was not discussed beforehand. In fact, he had said I would be dropped off first, so he turned off the expressway to go to her house, despite me saying that someone was waiting on me right now and I needed to go there. At the time, I was terrified of being late because my mom was extremely strict and we fought constantly as it was. I texted my mom to tell her that I had no choice in the matter, and he said he would take me there after we dropped her off. She called me, upset that I was making him wait. I told her I would be there soon. We were dropping off the girl. He heard me on the phone telling her I would be there and heard how upset I was, and he heard the multiple phone calls I was getting throughout the rest of the trip. Then he decided he needed to drop off the other guy. I told him I was going to get in trouble. He had to take me back now, but he would not. So it ended up that we were an hour and a half late. The whole time my mom was calling me and yelling. It was pitch black, and I had absolutely no idea where we were. I really barely even knew the guy. I did not realize at the time the power he had over me, and that he could have driven me out where we were to hurt me. I was truly in a dangerous position with a guy who did not seem too happy about letting me leave. And I think back and realize that could have been his intention the whole time, to drag me out in the middle of nowhere and do what he wanted. Maybe he just got off on the power. I will never know. As a prologue, I finally got back to the school, and my stepdad did not seem upset. He was not yelling, just quiet. When we got home, my mom started yelling at me, like it was my fault. I started crying, telling her I did not mean for that to happen. I was told I would be taken back, and that he just kept refusing to. Finally, when she stopped yelling for a second and heard me say there was nothing I could do, that he would not take me back, she just stopped and dropped it. It was strange because she never backed down, ever. And then I realized later in life that she recognized the dangerous position I had been in before I ever did and did not want to scare me. He did not stay on the team much longer after that. I am pretty sure she went and talked to my coach, and he did not put up with things like that. Story 22, when I was about 17, I was waiting for the last bus home from a friend of mine. It was about midnight and pretty dark. I was listening to some music, and in the distance I could see a person walking in my direction. I remember thinking that I felt safe, because now I knew I was not completely alone at night. And then this gut feeling kept telling me that I was not safe just because I was not alone outside. Now I am usually the paranoid type when it comes to these things, but my gut always tells me not to worry. But this time my gut was screaming at me. As this person came closer, my gut was basically yelling at me to stop listening to music, not to dare turn my back to this person, to keep an eye on them, that I was not safe, and I was the one telling myself to calm down and not worry. Then this person turned out to be a man in his mid-40s. He said something, and because I was listening to music, I did not hear what it was, so he had to say it twice. He got pretty angry, and hurriedly and angrily he asked me what time the bus came in, and my gut was telling me to lie, not to tell him the actual time. So I lied and said the bus would be there in 5 minutes, while the real time was 10. He got a little weird shiver going for half a second and proceeded to walk past the bus stop. My gut told me not to turn my back to him, to keep an eye out. I told myself that he was probably just going to walk to the next stop. Later, the bus showed up and the guy never got on. That was one of the weirdest experiences of my life. Still not sure what happened there, but I do think that my instincts were right, that the guy had bad intentions. Story 23, I had a friend who seemed like a really nice guy. He was my boss and friend's partner and was very supportive as her partner and supportive of the people who worked for her. But as her friend, she started to tell me some of his less fine moments, such as him hitting her, and when they went on a break as a result, he cheated on her. She told me that when he drank, he turned into a completely different person, and she had told him he should completely stop drinking. They had been together a long time, but as they got serious thinking about marriage and babies, she realized she could not deal with his lying, cheating, and drinking. She realized she could not marry him and dumped him. We went out with some other friends for a drink, to a pub we never usually went to for safety. He got drunk somewhere and phoned to say he was coming to get us. In his culture, she was practically considered his. They had been together long enough to be considered husband and wife, despite never marrying. So he and the other men in the city viewed her as his property pretty much. She could not just dump him and find a new man. That would be cheating, and only men could get away with cheating. So men who knew them and saw which pub she had gone to told him where we were. He turned up with a machete and attacked her date. Luckily, he hit first with his hand before drawing the machete, but he still did a lot of damage with just that one hit to the ear. Her date and the rest of our friends managed to escape. I have never seen anyone run so fast. He attacked her new car when he could not get her new man. When we tried to talk to him, he threatened me with the machete. So my friend Pepper sprayed him, which incapacitated him. And it got me too. Ouch. When the police arrived, my friend got in trouble for using pepper spray. No charges were brought against her ex. Story 24. I live in a crowded area city that is not ideal for running, so a few years back I would go running in the upper part of my city. Where I live is kind of like a hill, and the higher up you go, the closer you get to a wooded area with fewer homes. It is really quiet up there, and ideal for running because you can actually run in the street since cars do not often pass by. At this point, I was casually walking because I cannot run continuously, and my boyfriend called me during his lunch break at work. I had my headphones in and had my phone at my side so you could not tell I was on the phone. A car slowly pulled up next to me, and there was absolutely nobody outside. He rolled down the window and I put the phone up next to my face to make it clear that I was now on the phone. And I said to my boyfriend, "Just 1 second, I am almost home from my run." And the man looked around and mumbled, "Are you okay?" Because I guess he did not know what to say now that he knew I was on the phone. I said yes and turned around and went back down the hill so I would be around more people. I ended up running home. In this same area, I was walking my dog with my boyfriend in the fall after dinner, so it was already starting to get dark. A guy had sunglasses on, a bandana over his nose and mouth, and was dragging a baseball bat. He walked up to me and my boyfriend just tried to steer us in another direction. He started asking if we knew where a specific street was, which was odd because it was only a street away from where we were. It was also weird that his face was covered and he was dragging a baseball bat. Of course, my dog wanted to walk up to him and get pets, so she made it difficult to casually walk away. Story 25, I was parked in a one-way street that was only about 10 meters long. It was the middle of the night, no one around. I was collecting my friend, waiting for her to get to the car. Behind me, another car pulled up, and I was blocking the way, so I pulled to the side and shouted sorry. The car parked just in front of me, blocking my way forward. A huge guy got out of that car, started shouting in a massive booming voice, running at my car. I slammed it in reverse and started moving. I knew there was a wall behind me and I could not get out that way. By this time, the guy had caught up to me and one fist went straight through my passenger window. I was terrified. I put it into first gear and drove as fast as I could. The thing is, there was no car-size gap in front of me. Between a brick wall and this guy's car was a car-size space, but he had left his door open. I kept driving through this door and it came clean off. The guy's car door was on my bonnet for a good 20 meters. I kept driving, told my mate not to come out and called the police. I told them I had just been in a collision, but there was no way I was staying at the scene. My car was totaled, although I managed to get it home. The police told me the next day that they did not believe my story. Who knows what they did believe? That is when I lost faith in the police too. Story 26. When I was 10, I was walking to the corner store with my 5-year-old brother when a man in a truck stopped in the middle of the street and asked me to come to his door. I immediately said no. He put a gun outside the door and pointed it at me and said, "Yeah, I have a gun, come here." I walked to the driver's side the whole time with my hands behind me, signaling to my brother to keep walking. I even told him before I approached to keep walking to the store. The guy proceeded to ask weird questions like, "Do you hate your family? Do you want to run away? Have you ever wanted to do whatever you want?" I placated him with my answers so as not to upset him. He said, "I am going to pull into the driveway, turn the truck around, and you are going to get in." I said, "Okay," and as soon as he pulled in to turn around, I turned to run to the store. But my little brother, being 5, was waiting right behind me, so I scooped him up, threw him over my shoulder, and ran as fast as I could to the corner store. The old man who ran the store was a family friend. He called the cops and then proceeded to pull out the biggest handgun I had ever seen from behind the counter. He asked what the truck looked like and left us in the store with his wife. The cops came and no one ever found the guy. Later in life, I have had some scary dealings with people. A shotgun pointed at my face for being Mexican. Walking in on a substance deal in a sketchy bathroom and having a pistol on me while they decided if I should be allowed to leave. Being escorted to my truck and threatened. But being 10 years old and having an adult talk to me in this weird fashion and having to get my brother away was the scariest encounter with a human I have ever had. Story 27. When I was about 14 or so, I had to stay after school one Friday for a Friday night school. Basically, you stay about 2 hours after school as punishment for too many pink slips, which are also a punishment for anything from being late to class to talking back to the teacher. Friday night school was fine, I had been to a couple of them, and I had always walked home after. I had never had a problem until this one day. I was walking down the sidewalk, and I got to this Walgreens. There was a street almost directly across, but still slightly at an angle from the Walgreens, so it did not quite line up properly with the driveway ramp. There was a car at the stop sign on that street, and I saw them, but kept walking. I was a pedestrian, so I had the right of way and figured they would wait. They did not. They started driving at me and stopped in the middle of the main road and honked as if I was supposed to stop. I just kept walking. They stopped in the lot, and three girls who looked a couple years older than me got out screaming about how I needed to apologize and calling me all sorts of names and saying that if I did not apologize, they would beat me up. I was in shock and terrified because there were three of them and one of me. One of them came up to me screaming and blasted me in the side of my head while the other two egged her on. Meanwhile, the mum was in the car trying to get them to leave me alone. The girl hit me a couple more times, and I heard her sister ask how old I was. The girl who was hitting me stepped back, looked at my pink cheetah backpack school hoodie, and I guess decided I had had enough. They just got back in the car and went wherever they were going. The whole time I was frozen in fear, crying with snot running down my face. It was awful. I felt like such a loser and like it was all my fault, but I knew I had not done anything wrong, and if I had fought back, it probably would have been worse. Story 28. This actually just happened recently. I became friends with a guy that spent some time in Iraq. 2 tours. He has post-traumatic stress disorder, but hides it well. We like to drink, which comes into play shortly. He turned me on to the show The Ranch on Netflix. There are vets on the show, and there is a specific character with post-traumatic stress disorder in later seasons. We were pretty drunk this night when it got to that part. He had watched it before and knew what was going to happen. In between episodes, he started telling me what had messed up his head. Really serious stuff. Children are known to stop convoys to ambush them. Sometimes it does not end well. It turns out my buddy had to do something horrible to save his squad. He described it in detail. Really sad stuff. So we were drunk as hell, and the episode came on. The guy in the show had a really bad episode. Next thing I know, my buddy totally lost it. He just jumped out of his chair, eyes popping out of his head, looking around in a panic but not seeing any of us in the room, hyperventilating. He hid in the corner in a fight stance, absolutely wigging out. He would not respond to his name, would not focus on anything, just ready to rip someone's head off. Nobody knew what to do. 10 minutes went by, which seemed like an eternity, and by pure luck, his favorite song came on in the show in the background. He snapped out of it, sank to the floor, and just looked around before bursting into tears. He kept saying, "I am sorry," over and over. He eventually calmed down enough to start speaking again and just looked at me and said, "It happened, did it not? It ended up okay, but it was really like in the movies." I thought they hammed those episodes up a little bit for Hollywood. I have never seen anything like it. I have so much more respect for these guys over there. I have a lot of vets in my family, so I already did. But they made it out mostly okay. It was some seriously scary stuff. Story 29. Half awake and typing on my phone, so please excuse any mistakes I might make. I have told this story on here before, in case anyone thinks it sounds familiar. I was 19, and cell phones were barely a thing yet. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was walking home from a night out with friends at a bar. I had not been drinking, but I had been at a bar watching bands play. I had to walk about 6 or 7 blocks to get to my house. I was on a main road, pretty well lit for how late it was. A car passed me and turned right at the intersection ahead and parked on the street not too far in, not really next to any particular building. I was only half paying attention. I walked through the intersection and started walking past a row of buildings. The guy must have gotten out of his car and run around the back of the buildings because he was waiting for me between 2 of them. He stepped out and grabbed me. There was absolutely no one around to see me or hear me. I started trying to kick and scream, and he was dragging me between the buildings to the parking lot behind them. I weighed about 100 pounds at the time, and I am 5 feet tall, so he was picking me up off the ground at points while I was struggling to keep my feet down or kicking against him. I had my hands in my hoodie pocket when he grabbed me, and in one of my hands I was wearing a pair of brass knuckles. My roommate had given them to me a while back and told me that if I was walking alone at night to wear them on my hand. I always did. He had his arms around me sort of sideways and was awkwardly dragging me. I got my arm free and swung the best I could and punched him in the face with the brass knuckles. I am still not sure if I really hurt him or if it just surprised him because of the weight, but he immediately let go of me. I felt his arms release and I took off running. He started to chase me, yelling all sorts of stuff about me being a cunt. Then he turned and ran the other way to his car. I ducked into the neighborhood and started running through yards. He tried to chase me, but I was not making it easy. I hid behind a garage for a while and then took the most zigzagged way to my house. I was still terrified he had followed me somehow. I got inside and my roommate was not home because he worked third shift. I thought about calling the police, but I never got a really good look at him. I was so panicked that I could only remember the color of his car. That was about it. I did not know what I would say. Now, in my 30s, after listening to a million crime podcasts and watching all the crime shows, I feel more sure I would be able to pay more attention and even attempt to collect evidence in a situation like this, like collecting his skin with my fingernails. I still struggle to think what his plan was from there. I can only assume he planned to rape me at the very least. It was one of the scariest things that ever happened to me. Definitely my scariest moment with a stranger. Story 30. My uncle has severe schizophrenia, and he was homeless and off his medication for a few years, and none of us knew where he was or whether he was alive or dead. We had moved to Detroit 1 week earlier, and that evening he showed up at our front door ranting and raving about aliens and Jesus and other things, and my mom and dad had no choice but to let him stay with us. He had last been heard from in Denver, where the rest of the family lived, so they wanted him to come inside for the night while they figured out what to do with him. When I woke up in the morning and opened my door, he was laying on the floor, extremely emaciated and scary looking, covered in tattoos and dressed in black clothes, reaching out toward me with both hands and giving me the creepiest smile. I freaked out, shut my door, locked it, and hid in my room for about 3 hours before I felt safe enough to peek out. When I finally came out, I went downstairs and found him yelling at my pregnant mom in the kitchen while my dad was away at his very first day of a new job and could not miss it. My mom had thought she could handle him, but we had no idea how violent he could be. When he saw me, he grabbed me and said he wanted to take me to the freeway to look at the messages the aliens were leaving in the trash on the side of the road, saying that children were pure enough to receive the messages. I was crying, my mom freaked out, and she grabbed all of us, shoved us in the car, and took us to the cops, who said they could not do anything. Eventually, my dad got home and somehow got my uncle on a train back to Denver for the rest of the family to deal with. And that remains one of the scariest encounters I have ever had. Story 31. 80s, 14 years old, I snuck out of the house to go hang out with my graffiti writer boyfriend. I walked home from the train alone around 2 in the morning and heard running footsteps behind me. I turned around smiling, thinking it would be my boyfriend surprising me. But instead it was some random guy who punched me hard right in the face and shoved me to the ground. He grabbed me by the hair and was banging my head against the sidewalk with one hand and holding his other hand over my mouth. All I could think was, no, this is not happening. Then I felt myself about to lose consciousness and knew I needed to do something fast, so I somehow pulled my arm away and stuck my fingers in his eye. He pulled his hand off my mouth in reaction, and I started screaming. A neighbor ran out of his house and the guy ran away. So did I, because I was 14 and worried I was going to get in trouble for sneaking out. I sat in the middle of my bedroom floor, huddled in a ball, heart pounding because I was sure the guy was going to come crashing through my window. I snuck out in the morning so I did not have to explain my black eyes and battered face to my parents. Even now, so many years later, I flinch when someone comes up unexpectedly behind me. And as a mom now, I cringe for my own mom, because we lived on a street that was an exit ramp for a bridge. So if the guy had succeeded in knocking me out, he could have dragged me under the bridge and she probably never would have seen me again.